Blood poured onto the checkered linoleum floor of the diner, pooling around the most feared man in Chicago. Vincent Costa was dying. His elite bodyguards were useless, screaming into cell phones as his pulse faded to nothing. A specialized hollow-point bullet had torn through his chest, and the nearest underground mob doctor was 30 miles away. He was seconds away from a violent, pathetic end. But out from the kitchen stepped a woman with a coffee pot in one hand and a stained apron tied around her waist. She wasn't a surgeon, she was just a night shift waitress. And in less than 3 minutes, using nothing but diner supplies, she did the impossible. The rain was coming down in sheets over the industrial outskirts of Chicago, washing the grease and grime into the gutters. Inside the Golden Lily Diner, the neon sign buzzed with a rhythmic, irritating hum. It was 3:14 a.m. Sarah Miller wiped down the counter for the 5th time, her eyes heavy. She was 32, quiet, and possessed a gaze that suggested she had seen far too much of the world. Her hands, though currently smelling of bleach and stale coffee, were remarkably steady. There were only 2 patrons in the diner, a long-haul trucker asleep in the corner booth, and Frank the manager, who was doing inventory in the back. It was supposed to be another monotonous, invisible night. Then, the reinforced glass doors shattered inward. The bell above the door didn't just chime, it violently clanged as 3 large men burst into the diner. The scent of ozone, wet wool, and the heavy, undeniable copper stench of blood filled the room instantly. "Lock the damn door, pull the blinds," roared the man in the lead. This was Dominic Russo, a man whose face was plastered across federal watch lists. His tailored Brioni suit was soaked in rain and blood, but he wasn't the one bleeding. Between Dominic and another bruised enforcer, they carried a 3rd man. He was tall, powerfully built, but his head lolled to the side. Vincent Costa, the undisputed boss of the Costa crime syndicate. To the criminal underworld, he was untouchable. To the frantic men dragging him into the diner, he was rapidly becoming a corpse. They dropped Vincent onto the floor near the counter. The impact knocked over a display of pies, glass shattering around them. "Boss, stay with me. Look at me, Vince," Dominic shouted, ripping open Vincent's ruined silk shirt. A massive pool of dark arterial blood was rapidly expanding across the linoleum. The bullet had struck him high in the right side of his chest, just below the collarbone, and there was no exit wound. Vincent's lips were turning a terrifying shade of blue. His chest heaved unevenly, the right side completely immobile. Frank rushed out from the back, dropping his clipboard. "Hey, you can't be in." Dominic didn't even look up. He drew a custom 1911 pistol and leveled it at Frank's head. "Shut your mouth, turn around, and sit on the floor, or I paint this diner with your brains." Frank dropped to his knees, whimpering. "Where the hell is Dr. Rossi?" Dominic yelled into an earpiece. "What do you mean he's dead? They got Rossi too?" Dominic's face drained of color. He looked down at Vincent. The invincible boss was drowning in his own blood, his airway making a horrific wet whistling sound. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter. She had spent the last 4 years hiding from the world, hiding from the high-stakes pressure of her former life at Johns Hopkins. She had traded her scrubs for a polyester apron because saving lives had ultimately cost her everything. She made a vow never to touch another patient. But as she watched Vincent Costa's eyes roll back and saw the unmistakable signs of a tension pneumothorax and a severed subclavian artery, the waitress disappeared. The trucker in the corner woke up, saw the guns, and bolted for the back exit. The enforcer raised his weapon to shoot him in the back. "Don't shoot." Sarah's voice cut through the diner like a whip. It wasn't the frantic plea of a terrified civilian. It was a bark of absolute, unyielding authority. Dominic swung his gun toward her. "Get on the ground, sweetheart, before I put a hole in you, too." Sarah didn't drop. She locked eyes with the mobster, her face an unreadable mask of calm. He's in severe respiratory distress. The bullet punctured his lung, and air is trapped in his chest cavity, crushing his heart. He also has an arterial bleed. If you don't let me touch him, your boss will be dead in 40 seconds. Dominic's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're a waitress." "I'm his only chance," Sarah shot back, already moving out from behind the counter. "Put the gun down and help me, or watch him die. Your choice, right now." For a fraction of a second, the fate of the Chicago underworld hung in the balance. He lowered the gun. "If he dies, I'll take my time killing you." Sarah was already on the floor beside Vincent. She didn't flinch at the blood soaking into her jeans. "Frank," she yelled without looking back. "Get the first aid kit. The highest proof alcohol we have behind the bar, a roll of duct tape, and the sharpest paring knife from the kitchen. Now." Frank scrambled to obey, terrified by both the mobsters and his suddenly commanding employee. Sarah pressed her palms down hard against Vincent's neck and chest, feeling the violent flutter of his fading pulse. His trachea was deviating to the left, a classic sign. The pressure in his right chest cavity was immense. Frank skidded back to her, dumping a bottle of cheap 100 proof vodka, a pathetic first aid kit, a roll of silver tape, and a small razor-sharp kitchen knife on the floor. "Hold his arms," Sarah ordered the enforcer. "What are you doing?" Dominic demanded, stepping forward. "Decompressing his chest. He can't breathe." Sarah unscrewed the vodka and poured it directly over Vincent's chest and her own hands. Vincent didn't even twitch. He was slipping into profound shock. She needed a hollow tube. Her eyes darted around. The diner's supplies were useless. Then she saw the metal reusable straws Frank had ordered last month to be eco-friendly. She grabbed one, snapping it in half to create a sharp, jagged edge. Without hesitation, Sarah positioned the tip of the paring knife at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line on Vincent's right side. Dominic lunged forward. "You're stabbing him." "Back off," Sarah roared, driving the small knife through the muscle and into the chest cavity. A sharp hiss of trapped air escaped, carrying a spray of fine, bloody mist. Vincent's body seized, and suddenly, violently, he sucked in a massive, ragged breath. His blue lips slowly began to return to a pale pink. Dominic stared, his mouth slightly open. The enforcer crossed himself. "That buys us time," Sarah muttered, her hands moving in a blur, but the blood was still pulsing rapidly from the wound. She shoved her fingers directly into the bullet hole, searching blindly through torn muscle and tissue until she felt the slick, pulsing tear of the subclavian artery. She clamped down on it with her thumb and index finger, pinching it shut. "I have the artery, but I can't hold it forever," she said, panting slightly. "He needs a vascular surgeon. I need hemostatic gauze, which we don't have." "Our doctor is dead," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The reality of the situation was settling in. They were completely exposed. "We can't go to a hospital. Half the police force is on the payroll of the guys who just shot him." Sarah looked up, her fingers aching from the pressure she was applying to the artery inside Vincent's chest. "If you move him right now, my grip slips, and he bleeds out in the back of your SUV." "So we stay here?" the enforcer asked, looking out the shattered windows into the rain. "They'll find us in 10 minutes. "Bring the car around to the back door," Sarah ordered. She looked at Dominic. "Do you have a clean pair of pliers in your trunk? Or superglue? Anything?" Dominic blinked, completely out of his depth. I have a toolkit, and some industrial cyanoacrylate glue for weapon grips." "Bring it. We're going to chemically cauterize and clamp the bleeder before we move him." 5 minutes later, under the dim, flickering lights of the Golden Lily, a waitress performed an emergency arterial clamping using needle-nose pliers sterilized with cheap vodka, sealing the surrounding tissue tears with weapon-grade superglue, and wrapping the chest tightly with plastic wrap and duct tape. When she finally pulled her blood-soaked hands away, the bleeding had stopped. Vincent Costa was unconscious, but he was breathing. He was alive. Sarah sat back on her heels, exhausted, the adrenaline suddenly draining from her system. She looked down at her hands, shaking now, covered in the blood of a Mafia don. She had broken her vow. Dominic holstered his weapon. He looked at Vincent, then slowly turned his gaze to Sarah. The hostility in his eyes was replaced by a cold, calculating realization. "Frank," Dominic said without looking at the manager, "give me the security tapes. Now." Frank handed over the hard drive, trembling. Dominic turned back to Sarah. "You saved his life. I owe you a debt." "Just leave," Sarah whispered, wiping her forehead, leaving a streak of red across her skin. "Get him out of here. I won't say a word." Dominic stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You're right. You won't say a word, because if his artery blows open in the car, I need you there to fix it." "No," Sarah stood up, backing away. "No, I stabilized him. That's it. I'm not going with you." The enforcer stepped behind her, blocking her escape to the kitchen. "Miss Miller," Dominic said, reading the name tag pinned to her bloody apron, "you don't understand. The people who hit us tonight knew our routes. They knew our doctor's location. We have a rat in our family. I can't trust anyone." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice, except the waitress who just saved his life with a metal straw. "You belong to the Costa family now." They shoved her into the back of a blacked-out Lincoln Navigator. The scent of expensive leather mixed nauseatingly with the smell of wet blood. Vincent lay across the back seat, his head resting heavily against Sarah's thigh. Dominic sat in the front passenger seat, a suppressed submachine gun resting across his lap. Sarah's mind raced. She was kidnapped by the most vicious organized crime syndicate in the Midwest. If the police stopped them, she would be implicated as an accessory. If the rival gang found them, she would be executed alongside them. "Keep pressure on the dressing," Dominic commanded, staring at her through the rearview mirror. "It's holding," Sarah replied coldly. "But he's developing a fever. The makeshift tools were not sterile. He's going to go into septic shock if he doesn't get broad-spectrum intravenous antibiotics." "We're going somewhere safe," Dominic replied. They drove for an hour, weaving through back roads, avoiding highways. The rain finally broke, revealing a pale, anemic moon. They pulled up to a massive wrought iron gate, hidden deep within a heavily wooded estate in the northern suburbs. Armed men stepped out of the shadows, recognizing Dominic's vehicle, and waved them through. The safe house wasn't a dirty basement. It was a sprawling, brutalist mansion made of concrete and glass. They carried Vincent inside, bypassing the lavish living quarters, and descended in a hidden elevator. The doors opened into a state-of-the-art underground medical bay. It looked like a trauma center, fully equipped with monitors, surgical lights, and glass door cabinets filled with supplies. "Dr. Rossi's playground," Dominic said, a trace of bitterness in his voice. "He was supposed to be here." They laid Vincent on the surgical table. Under the harsh halogen lights, he looked terrifyingly pale. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, with sharp, aristocratic features, now hollowed out by blood loss. "Get out of my way," Sarah said, her medical instincts overriding her fear. The environment was familiar. The equipment was top tier. She hooked Vincent up to the monitors. His heart rate was rapid and weak, his blood pressure dangerously low. She moved to the cabinets, seamlessly pulling IV bags, tubing, Rosafin, and bags of O-negative blood from the specialized cooler. "How do you know how to use all this?" Dominic asked, leaning against the wall, watching her every move. "I watch a lot of medical dramas," Sarah lied, establishing an IV line in Vincent's uninjured arm with perfect, practiced precision. She hung 2 units of blood and started a rapid infusion. For the next 12 hours, it was a grueling battle. Vincent's fever spiked to 104 degrees, his body thrashed in delirium. Sarah stayed by his side, administering antipyretics, managing the chest tube she had properly inserted using real medical equipment, and constantly checking the arterial clamp. She didn't sleep. She barely drank water. Dominic and his men locked down the perimeter. The atmosphere in the bunker was suffocating, thick with paranoia. Every ringing phone made the mobsters flinch. Around 4 p.m. the next day, the incessant beeping of the cardiac monitor leveled out into a steady, rhythmic tone. The fever broke. Sarah slumped into a rolling stool, resting her head against the cold metal of the supply. "Water," a raspy, gravelly voice broke the silence. Sarah's head snapped up. Vincent Costa's eyes were open. They were a piercing, icy blue, and despite his weakened state, they held a terrifying intensity. She poured a small cup of water, grabbed a sponge swab, and approached him. "Don't try to sit up. You've lost a catastrophic amount of blood." She moistened his cracked lips. Vincent swallowed painfully, his eyes locked onto her face. He studied her features, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the blood still crusted under her fingernails, the complete absence of fear in her posture. "Dominic told me what happened," Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the medical machines. "He said a waitress cut a hole in my chest with a kitchen knife." "It was a necessity," Sarah replied evenly. "Waitresses don't do blind arterial clamps," Vincent said, a faint, dangerous smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Miller." "That's the name on your W-2. It's not who you are." Vincent coughed, wincing as pain ripped through his chest. "You move like a combat surgeon. You give orders like a general." "I used to work in medicine. Now I pour coffee. That's all you need to know." Vincent's smile faded. "Dominic," he called out weakly. Dominic rushed into the room, relief flooding his face. "Boss, you're awake." "The bullet," Vincent wheezed. "Did you find it?" Dominic nodded, pulling a small plastic evidence bag from his pocket. Inside was a crushed, specialized piece of metal. "We found it lodged against your scapula. It's a hand-loaded, subsonic, armor-piercing round." Vincent closed his eyes, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. Only 3 people in Chicago have access to that specific ammunition. He opened his eyes, looking directly at Dominic. "And all 3 of them are in our family." The room went dead silent. Sarah took a step back, realizing the magnitude of what Vincent had just said. The hit wasn't from a rival gang, it was a coup. "Someone at the top table wants me dead," Vincent said coldly. He turned his gaze back to Sarah. "And they know I survived. Which means, whoever you are, Sarah Miller, you are now the primary target of the Costa Syndicate's new boss." "You're out of your mind," Sarah said, the chill in her voice matching the sterile, refrigerated air of the underground medical bay. She backed away from the operating table until her shoulders hit the glass doors of the supply cabinet. "I am a waitress. I have an eviction notice on my door and a cat that hasn't been fed. I don't exist in your world, and I am not participating in a Mafia civil war." Vincent Costa shifted on the surgical table, a spasm of raw agony tightening the muscles in his jaw. He didn't break eye contact. Even half naked, stitched together with fishing line and superglue, bleeding into plastic drainage tubes, the man exuded an oppressive gravity. "You stepped into my world the second you plunged a knife into my chest, Miss Miller," Vincent replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The men who hit me are professionals. They will sweep that diner. They will pull the traffic cameras. They will find out who was on shift. When they realize the bullet didn't kill me, they will look for the person who kept me alive. If you walk out of that steel door right now, you will be dead before the sun comes up." "He's right," Dominic interjected, stepping into Sarah's line of sight. He had discarded his ruined suit jacket and was currently disassembling and cleaning a matte black Glock 19 on a stainless steel tray. "Whoever set this up has the Chicago PD in their pocket. If you go to the cops, they'll deliver you straight to the men who want us dead." Sarah closed her eyes, pressing the heels of her hands against her temples. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the night was finally evaporating, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a terrifying clarity. She had spent 3 years meticulously erasing her footprint. No credit cards, no social media, cash only, working the graveyard shift where nobody asked questions. And in 3 minutes of reflex and medical instinct, she had burned it all to the ground. "Who?" Sarah asked, opening her eyes. "Who wants you dead?" Vincent looked up at the harsh halogen lights overhead. "The Costa Syndicate is a hydra. I'm the head, but the body is managed by 3 lieutenants. Albert DeLuca runs the port authorities and union rackets. Paulie Gatto handles the offshore accounts and digital laundering." Vincent paused, a bitter, dark shadow crossing his pale face. "And Raymond Costa, my younger brother. He oversees the legitimate fronts, the nursing homes, the private clinics, the pharmaceutical logistics." Sarah's blood ran cold. Pharmaceutical logistics. The words echoed in her mind, triggering a deeply buried, visceral panic. She hit it perfectly, an old habit from her days in the trauma ward. "The bullet was a subsonic armor-piercing round," Dominic chimed in, racking the slide of his pistol with a sharp, metallic clack. "It's a specialized caliber used exclusively by our internal security teams to prevent over-penetration in crowded environments. We source them through Raymond's logistics company to avoid federal background checks. The hitmen were our own ghosts." "Which means this bunker isn't safe," Sarah deduced, looking around the expansive, high-tech medical bay. "Only Dominic and I know the access codes to this specific facility," Vincent said, coughing weakly. Sarah instinctively moved forward, checking the chest tube seal and adjusting the flow of his oxygen nasal cannula. "But we are entirely cut off. The encrypted comms are jammed. The only way we can get supplies or communicate with loyalists is through blind drops using untraceable burner phones." "Speaking of which," Dominic said, checking his watch, "the medical resupply I called in 2 hours ago should be at the designated drop point. 4 miles from here, I need to go get it. Boss needs more broad-spectrum antibiotics, sterile surgical kits, and proper pain management." Vincent nodded slowly. "Take the secondary tunnel, leave the SUV here, use the unregistered sedan. If you are followed back, Dominic, I swear to God." "I won't be," Dominic said flatly. He looked at Sarah. "Keep him breathing." As the heavy steel blast doors hissed shut behind Dominic, sealing them in the bunker, a heavy silence fell over the room. The only sound was the rhythmic, high-pitched beep of the cardiac monitor. Sarah busied herself with Vincent's vitals, refusing to look at him. She checked his blood pressure 90/60, still dangerously low, but holding. She adjusted the IV drip rate, calculating the fluid volume in her head. "You're very quiet," Vincent observed. He was watching her hands. "Most people tremble when they're around me. Your hands are perfectly still. You didn't even flinch when Dominic pulled out the gun. Where did you train, Sarah?" "State University," she lied smoothly, checking his pupils with a penlight. "Nursing program. I dropped out." "A nursing dropout doesn't perform a blind subclavian artery clamp with needle-nose pliers," Vincent countered, a faint, predatory smirk on his lips. "A dropout doesn't know the exact dosage of Rocephin to administer for a contaminated chest wound without looking at a chart. You're a surgeon, a damn good one. And you're hiding." Sarah snapped off the penlight and glared at him. "My past is none of your business. My only job right now is making sure you don't go into hemorrhagic shock so your guard dog doesn't shoot me." "Fair enough," Vincent murmured, closing his eyes. "But in my world, secrets get people killed. If we're going to survive this, I need to know who I'm trusting." "You shouldn't trust anyone," Sarah replied coldly, "especially your own family." An hour later, the hydraulic hiss of the blast doors echoed through the bunker. Dominic strode in, carrying a large, unmarked cardboard box. He looked tense, his eyes darting around the room before settling on Vincent, who was dozing under the influence of the mild sedatives Sarah had found in the emergency crash cart. "Drop was clean," Dominic reported, setting the box down on a stainless steel prep table. "No tails. I took 3 different counter-surveillance routes back. Here's the gear." Sarah walked over, pulling a pair of purple nitrile gloves from a wall dispenser. She snapped them onto her hands with a sharp thwack. "Let me see what you got." "He's developing a localized infection around the makeshift incision site. I need to properly debride the tissue and start a targeted IV antibiotic regimen." Dominic sliced the packing tape with a switchblade and pulled open the flaps. Inside were neatly organized medical supplies, sterile gauze, surgical staples, vials of morphine, pre-filled syringes of antibiotics, and 6-liter bags of normal saline. "Perfect," Dominic said, grabbing a bag of saline. "He looks pale. Hook him up to another bag of fluids." Sarah reached out and snatched the bag from Dominic's hand. "Hey, what the hell?" Dominic growled. "Wait," Sarah whispered, her eyes narrowing. She walked over to the intense, overarching surgical lights above the operating table and held the clear plastic IV bag up to the blinding glare. She rotated the bag slowly. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. There, at the very base of the bag, near the rubber injection port, was a microscopic puncture. It was barely visible to the naked eye, sealed over with a tiny, nearly imperceptible dot of clear medical-grade adhesive. "Where did you get this?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising in panic. She dropped the bag onto the metal tray with a loud clatter and began frantically tearing through the rest of the box. She held up the next saline bag. Punctured. The next one. Punctured. "It was a blind drop," Dominic said, stepping forward, his hand instinctively dropping to the handle of his gun. "I called a burner number routed through a loyal dispatcher. What's wrong with it?" "It spiked," Sarah said, her voice shaking with a terrifying realization. She grabbed a clean syringe, jammed it into the port of the punctured bag, and drew a small amount of the clear fluid. She didn't have a chemical testing kit, but she didn't need one. She squirted a few drops onto the stainless steel table and rubbed it with her gloved finger. It left a faint, chalky white residue as it dried under the hot lights. "Potassium chloride," Sarah breathed, taking a step back. She looked at Vincent, who had woken up and was watching them with hawkish intensity. "High-concentration potassium chloride. If I had hung this IV bag, the potassium would have flooded your bloodstream. It disrupts the electrical signals in your heart muscle." "English, Doc," Dominic snapped, his face draining of color. "It would have caused a massive, irreversible cardiac arrest within 3 minutes," Sarah explained, her eyes wide. "There would be no signs of poisoning, no struggle. Because of your trauma and blood loss, any coroner would look at your body and rule it a natural heart failure secondary to the gunshot wound. It's an undetectable assassination." The silence in the bunker was deafening. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Only someone with high-level medical knowledge would know how to pull that off, Vincent said quietly. His voice was devoid of emotion, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying, contained fury. Only someone who controls the pharmaceutical supply chain. Raymond, Dominic whispered. He drew his gun, his knuckles turning white. I'll kill him. I'll drive to his estate right now and put a bullet between his eyes. No, Vincent ordered sharply. He's heavily guarded. If he sent spiked fluids, he knows the drop locations. He knows we survived, but he doesn't know where this bunker is yet. If you go after him, you confirm I'm alive, and he'll mobilize the entire syndicate against us. Sarah was still staring at the bags of spiked saline, her chest heaving. The pieces were locking together in her mind, forming a picture so horrifying it made her nauseous. Raymond Costa, the legitimate face of the Mafia, the man who owned a dozen private medical facilities and logistics chains across the Midwest. It was Raymond, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a hollow whisper. Vincent looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. I just said that. What do you know about my brother? Sarah slowly peeled off her purple gloves, dropping them into a biohazard bin. She looked at Vincent, finally letting the wall drop. She was done hiding. 3 years ago, I wasn't a waitress, Sarah said, her voice trembling but resolute. I was Dr. Sarah Bennett. I was the chief surgical resident of cardiothoracic surgery at Johns Hopkins. Dominic lowered his gun slightly, staring at her in disbelief. We had a patient, Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on the blank concrete wall behind Vincent. A 22-year-old girl, an innocent college student, involved in a drunk driving accident. She needed an emergency heart-lung bypass and a liver transplant. We had a match. The liver was on a helicopter, 10 minutes away. Vincent remained perfectly still, listening intently. Then, the hospital administrator burst into my OR, Sarah said, a bitter, angry tear finally escaping her eye. He told me to let the girl die. He said a VIP patient had just been admitted with acute liver failure, and the donor organ was being redirected. He offered me $2 million to simply step away from the table and let the girl bleed out. Let me guess, Vincent rasped softly. The VIP patient was a syndicate boss. He was the CEO of Apex Logistics, Sarah spat out, one of Raymond Costa's shell companies. I refused. I locked the OR doors, threatened to stab the administrator with a scalpel, and I saved the girl. Sarah took a deep breath, wiping her cheek. 12 hours later, the police raided my apartment. They found 3 kilos of fentanyl hidden in my air vents and offshore bank accounts opened in my name, showing millions in cartel bribes. My medical license was revoked. The FBI was preparing to indict me for federal drug trafficking. A man in a suit visited me in holding. He told me I had 2 choices: spend the rest of my life in federal prison and get shanked in the yard, or disappear forever. Vincent closed his eyes. He knew his brother's methods. Raymond destroys what he can't buy. So I disappeared, Sarah said softly. I became Sarah Miller. I poured coffee for truckers, so Raymond Costa wouldn't have me murdered. She looked directly at Vincent, a fierce, burning defiance radiating from her. I spent 3 years looking over my shoulder because of your family. And tonight, I accidentally saved the life of the man who rules it. A chilling, dark chuckle rumbled from Vincent's chest, turning into a painful cough. The universe is deeply, profoundly sick. He looked at Dominic. Raymond isn't just trying to take the throne. He's tying up loose ends. He killed our doctor, Rossi. He tried to kill me. Vincent turned his icy gaze back to Sarah. The Mafia boss wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at a weapon. A brilliant, disgraced surgeon who had an intimate understanding of his enemy's ruthlessness. Dr. Bennett, Vincent said, his voice laced with dangerous authority, my brother stole your life. He forced you into the shadows. I am going to tear his empire down to the studs, and I am going to bury him under it. Vincent reached out, his hand trembling slightly from weakness, but his grip firm as he grabbed the metal railing of the surgical bed. I need you to keep me alive long enough to do it. You are the only person in this city Raymond doesn't know about. You are the phantom pulse. Help me kill my brother, and I will give you your life back. The sterile air of the bunker felt heavier now, thick with the shared gravity of their revelation. Sarah Bennett, no longer just the quiet waitress from the Golden Lily, stood over the stainless steel table, staring at the lethal IV bags. She methodically dumped the potassium-spiked saline down the biohazard sink, flushing it with bleach. Every splash was a reminder of how close Raymond Costa had come to completing his silent coup. "If Raymond controls the supply lines, we have nothing," Dominic said, pacing the length of the medical bay like a caged tiger. "No painkillers, no sterile blood, no backup. We are functionally under siege in our own safe house." "We don't need his supply lines," Sarah replied, turning back to Vincent. Her voice had lost its tremor. The clinical, commanding tone of a chief surgical resident had fully returned. "I stabilized the artery, and his lung is reinflating. What he needs now is hemodynamic stability, oral antibiotics, and time. Things we can source from a regular pharmacy if we use cash." Vincent shifted on the bed, gritting his teeth as a fresh wave of pain radiated from his chest. "Time is the one commodity we don't have, doctor." Raymond called a summit. "My encrypted pager went off 20 minutes ago. It's a blind broadcast to the lieutenants. He's calling a sit-down at midnight tomorrow. He's going to declare you dead," Dominic said, stopping in his tracks. "He'll say a rival family hit you, step up as the grieving brother, and take the throne to avenge you." "Exactly," Vincent rasped, his pale blue eyes hardening into chips of ice. "Albert DeLuca and Polly Gatto are businessmen, but they are loyal to the old ways. If Raymond presents them with a fait accompli, they will bend the knee to avoid a civil war. Once they pledge loyalty, the entire syndicate's muscle shifts to his command. We will have 500 armed men hunting us." Sarah crossed her arms, her clinical mind rapidly analyzing the tactical situation as if it were a complex trauma case. "So, you have to walk into that summit and show them you're alive." Vincent let out a dark, breathless laugh. "Walk? Sarah, my right lung is partially collapsed, my subclavian artery is held together by hardware store glue, and my body is fighting off a massive systemic infection. If I stand up right now, I'll rip the sutures and bleed to death in my shoes." "You're not standing up right now," Sarah said, pulling a rolling stool to his bedside. "But in 24 hours, I can get you upright. It will be the most excruciating pain of your life, and it goes against every Hippocratic oath I ever swore. But I can cocktail you with enough adrenaline, local anesthetics, and corticosteroids to keep you on your feet for exactly 45 minutes. After that, your body will crash." Vincent stared at her, a profound respect blooming in the cold depths of his eyes. 45 minutes is all I need to put a bullet in my brother's head." "Where is the summit being held?" Dominic asked. Vincent sighed, a sound that rattled wetly in his chest. "The Sterling Cross Medical Pavilion. It's a private, ultra-luxury surgical wing in the Fulton Market District. Raymond owns the holding company that built it. It's his fortress. Private security, keycard access only, impenetrable." Sarah froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. The Sterling Cross Medical Pavilion wasn't just a front. 3 years ago, when she had desperately tried to trace the source of the fentanyl planted in her apartment, her private investigator had found a single paper trail leading back to a shell corporation registered to that exact building. It was the epicenter of her destruction. "It's not impenetrable," Sarah said quietly. Both men looked at her. "When you are the chief resident of cardiothoracic surgery at Hopkins, you get courted by the best private hospitals in the country," Sarah explained, her voice tight with vindication. 4 years ago, before Raymond ruined my life, his recruiters flew me out to Chicago to tour the Sterling Cross Pavilion. They wanted me to be their marquee surgeon. I spent 3 days reviewing their architectural blueprints to see if the OR suites met my standards." She grabbed a medical clipboard and a dry erase marker, rapidly sketching a layout on the back of the board. "The front entrance is a fortress," Sarah said, drawing a large square. "But Raymond deals in illegal pharmaceuticals and black market organ logistics. He can't move that through the lobby. There is a subterranean loading dock meant for biohazard disposal and discreet VIP transport. It connects to an industrial freight elevator that bypasses the main security grid and opens directly into the penthouse boardroom. The access code is hardwired into a secure lockbox by the loading bay for the nighttime disposal crews." Dominic looked at the schematic, his eyes widening. "You remember the layout?" "I have a photographic memory for surgical theaters and hospital infrastructure," Sarah said flatly. "I can get you to the penthouse without triggering a single alarm." Vincent pushed himself up slightly, fighting through a grimace of agony. "Dominic, leave the bunker. Go to the south side. I need you to gather the ghosts." "Boss, you sure?" Dominic asked, hesitating. If Raymond finds them. Raymond doesn't know they exist, Vincent said. He looked at Sarah. The ghosts are men I pulled out of the fire before I was the boss, men who owe me blood debts. They operate entirely off the syndicate's books. Get Tommy, get Carter, and get the Russo twins. Tell them it's time to pay the ferryman. Dominic nodded sharply, holstering his weapon. I'll be back by dawn with an army. As the heavy steel doors sealed Dominic out, the bunker grew deathly quiet once again. Sarah turned back to the medical supply cart, drawing up a syringe of clear liquid. What's that? Vincent asked, watching her hands. Lidocaine and a mild steroid, Sarah said, approaching him with an alcohol swab. If you're going to walk tomorrow, I need to start injecting the tissue around your chest wall to numb the muscle tearing. It's going to hurt. Vincent didn't flinch as the needle pierced his skin. He kept his gaze locked on her face. You lost your career, your reputation, your entire life. Why didn't you run? Why stay in Chicago and pour coffee? Sarah focused on the injection, pushing the plunger down slowly, because running felt like admitting guilt. I stayed in the city where my life ended, because I always believed, deep down, I would find a way to cut out the rot that infected it. I just never thought my scalpel would be the boss of the Costa family. By 5 a.m., the bunker felt claustrophobic. The heavy hiss of the pneumatic doors signaled Dominic's return. He didn't come alone. 4 men stepped into the harsh light of the medical bay. They didn't wear tailored Brioni suits like Raymond's corporate enforcers. They wore heavy work jackets, tactical boots, and expressions forged in absolute violence. Tommy the Wrench Gallagher, a massive, scarred enforcer. Carter, a rail-thin former Marine sniper whose eyes constantly scanned the room. And the Russo twins, 2 terrifyingly silent men carrying heavy duffel bags that clinked with the distinct sound of high-caliber weaponry. Ghosts are in, Dominic announced, dropping a blueprint of the Fulton Market District onto the metal prep table. Vincent was sitting up on the edge of the surgical bed. He looked like a man resurrected from the grave. His skin was pale, shining with a cold sweat, and his torso was tightly bound in layers of compression bandages and thick gauze. But his eyes were terrifyingly alive. Listen to me, Vincent said, his voice raspy but echoing with absolute authority. The 4 hardened killers immediately snapped to attention. Tonight, my brother is going to try to steal my city. He thinks he bought the cops, he thinks he bought the doctors, and he thinks he put me in a body bag. We are going to walk into the Sterling Cross Pavilion and remind him that the Costa throne is earned with blood, not paperwork. He gestured to Sarah. This is Dr. Bennett. For the next 18 hours, her word is my word. If she says stop, you stop. If she says shoot, you shoot. She is getting us inside. Carter tilted his head, looking at the blood-stained woman in the medical apron. A doctor is leading the breach? A doctor who knows where the arteries are, Sarah said, stepping forward without a trace of intimidation. She tapped the blueprint. Raymond will have his elite security on the penthouse floor. Men armed with the same subsonic rounds that nearly killed Vincent. We are not engaging them in a firefight. We are cutting off their circulation. She drew a line down to the basement level. We enter through the biohazard loading dock at 11:45 p.m. Carter, you will take out the camera feeds from the exterior junction box. The rest of us move to the freight elevator. Raymond will have the main power grid on lockdown to secure the summit. If the power is locked, how do we get the freight elevator to the penthouse? Tommy asked, crossing his massive arms. Because hospital elevators run on an isolated redundant pneumatic system designed for emergency evacuations during power failures, Sarah explained, her eyes cold and calculating. I will manually override the relays in the basement terminal. It will take us straight to the boardroom, bypassing every card reader and armed guard in the stairwells. Vincent stood up. The silence in the room was absolute as everyone watched the Mafia boss test his ruined body. A muscle feathered in his jaw, and a bead of sweat rolled down his temple, but he planted his feet firmly on the concrete floor. Dominic, arm up, Vincent ordered. Sarah, get my suit. 10 hours later, the rain had returned, slicking the neon-lit streets of Chicago in a greasy sheen. A black, unmarked utility van pulled into the alleyway behind the towering glass structure of the Sterling Cross Medical Pavilion. Inside the van, the tension was of physical weight. Vincent wore a dark, tailored suit that expertly hid the bulky compression bandages holding his chest together. Beside him, Sarah was dressed in dark, tactical clothing provided by Dominic, her hair pulled back tight. Underneath her jacket, a suppressed Sig Sauer 9mm rested in a shoulder holster. Dominic had offered it to her. She had taken it without hesitation. Heart rate is elevated, Sarah whispered to Vincent, pressing 2 fingers against his carotid artery. The adrenaline cocktail is working, but it's burning through your reserves. You have 40 minutes from the moment we step out of this van before your blood pressure bottoms out. It'll only take 5, Vincent murmured, checking the magazine of his custom 1911. Cameras are blind. Carter's voice crackled over the secure earpiece. You have a 3-minute loop before the security desk notices the static. Go, Vincent commanded. The side doors slid open. They moved like shadows through the pouring rain. Dominic and Tommy took point, dropping the 2 private security guards at the loading dock with swift, brutal strikes to the neck before they could even unholster their weapons. Sarah stepped past the unconscious bodies, approaching the heavy steel doors of the biohazard elevator. She ripped open the electrical panel on the wall, her hands moving with the same blinding speed and precision she used in an operating room. She bypassed the biometric scanner, crossing 2 heavy-gauge wires. Sparks showered onto the wet concrete. The massive steel doors ground open with a heavy, industrial shudder. Elevator is live, Sarah said, stepping inside. Vincent, Dominic, Tommy, and the twins filed in behind her. The doors slid shut, sealing them in a sterile metal box. Sarah hit the override button for the penthouse. As the elevator surged upward, pulling the gravity from their stomachs, Vincent looked at the disgraced surgeon standing beside him. She was calm, her eyes fixed on the floor numbers, ticking upward above the door. Whatever happens in that room, Vincent said quietly, ensuring only she could hear, you don't pull that trigger. You are a healer, Sarah. Let me be the monster. That's my job. Sarah looked at him, the reflection of the floor numbers glowing in her dark eyes. Raymond Costa isn't a patient anymore, Vincent. He's a disease, and a surgeon's job is to cut the disease out. The elevator hummed. Floor 48. Floor 49. Ding. The doors parted, revealing the opulent, mahogany-lined penthouse boardroom. At the far end of the long table stood Raymond Costa, holding a glass of scotch, mid-toast to the 2 rival lieutenants. Raymond's smile vanished instantly. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering loudly against the marble floor. Hello, little brother, Vincent said, stepping out of the elevator, his gun raised. I hear you've been practicing medicine without a license. The silence in the penthouse boardroom was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the torrential rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The shards of Raymond Costa's crystal Scotch glass lay scattered across the imported marble, catching the dim, ambient light of the city skyline. Albert DeLuca and Paulie Gatto, the 2 veteran lieutenants of the Costa Syndicate, sat frozen in their high-backed leather chairs. Their eyes darted from the heavy, suppressed weapons of the ghosts to the impossible apparition standing before them. Vince, Paulie breathed, his face draining of color. He looked at Raymond, then back to the doorway. We were just told. Raymond said the Colombians hit you on the interstate. He said you were dead. Vincent stepped fully into the room, his black suit absorbing the shadows. Every step was a masterclass in deception. Underneath the tailored wool, his right lung was burning, and the jagged tear in his subclavian artery strained against the medical glue and sutures. The adrenaline cocktail Sarah had injected into his myocardium was the only thing keeping him upright, a chemical puppet master pulling the strings of a failing body. Rumors of my demise were greatly exaggerated, Paulie, Vincent said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded the room. He kept his custom 1911 leveled squarely at his brother's chest. But I understand the confusion. Raymond paid a lot of money to ensure I ended up on a slab tonight. Raymond recovered quickly. The initial shock morphed into a mask of cold corporate calculation. He adjusted the cuffs of his Tom Ford suit, sneering at the men backing his brother. Look at him, Albert, Raymond said, his voice dripping with venom, gesturing toward Vincent. Look at the sweat on his face. Look at how he's favoring his right side. He's a dead man walking. He found some back alley butcher to sew him up long enough to walk in here and ruin the transition, but he's bleeding out as we speak. Raymond pressed a hidden button under the mahogany conference table. My security team is on the floor below. When they breach those doors, anyone standing behind my brother dies with him. Dominic chuckled darkly, stepping out of the elevator. You mean the ex-mercenaries wearing the earpieces? Tommy and the twins introduced themselves in the stairwell. They won't be joining us, Ray. Raymond's eyes twitched. The realization that his impenetrable fortress had been breached without a single alarm began to crack his composed facade. Who did this? Raymond demanded, his gaze sweeping over the ghosts until it landed on the woman standing slightly behind Vincent. She wasn't wearing tactical gear or carrying a heavy rifle like the others. She wore a dark jacket over a blood-stained diner apron, her hair pulled back tightly. Sarah stepped out from Vincent's shadow. The dim lighting of the boardroom fell across her face. Raymond stared at her. For the first time in his life, the legitimate face of the Costa Mafia looked genuinely terrified. He took a step back, hitting the edge of the conference table. You, Raymond whispered, his mind desperately trying to reconcile the face of the woman standing in his boardroom with the ghost he had buried 3 years ago, Dr. Bennett. Albert DeLuca frowned, looking between them. Who is Dr. Bennett? She is the chief of surgery your new boss tried to destroy, Vincent answered, his grip on the pistol unwavering. 3 years ago, Raymond needed a liver for one of his shell company CEOs. When Dr. Bennett refused to let an innocent college student die on her operating table to give it to him, Raymond planted fentanyl in her home and wiped her existence off the map. Vincent took another step forward. The timer in his head was ticking. He had 20 minutes left before the adrenaline burned out and his heart stopped. But Raymond made a mistake, Vincent continued, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He used his own logistical network to supply the subsonic rounds for his hitmen. And he forgot that the woman he forced into the shadows was the only trauma surgeon in Chicago brilliant enough to fix a blown artery with needle-nose pliers and superglue. Sarah locked eyes with Raymond. The fear she had carried for 3 years evaporated, replaced by the cold clinical detachment she used to navigate open-heart surgeries. You should have let me do the transplant, Raymond, Sarah said, her voice piercing the silence like a scalpel. It would have been much less complicated for you. Raymond's face twisted into a snarl of desperate rage. You think this changes anything? He's crashing. Look at his chest. It was true. A dark, wet stain was slowly spreading across the crisp white fabric of Vincent's dress shirt, soaking through the suit jacket. The localized anesthetic was wearing off. Vincent swayed slightly, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the gun. Albert, Polly, Raymond shouted, pulling a silver, snub-nosed revolver from an ankle holster with lightning speed. Kill them! He's weak! The syndicate belongs to the strong! But the lieutenants didn't move. They looked at the ghosts, whose weapons were zeroed in on Raymond's head. They looked at Vincent, a man who had literally crawled out of the grave through sheer willpower to protect his empire. And they looked at the brilliant surgeon standing beside him, a testament to the fatal flaw in Raymond's arrogance. Sit down, Ray, Albert DeLuca said quietly, pushing his chair back and raising his hands in surrender to Vincent. You overplayed your hand. Raymond realized he was entirely alone. With a feral scream, he raised his revolver, aiming directly at Sarah's chest. You ruined everything. The gunshots in the enclosed penthouse were deafening. Before Raymond could fully depress the trigger, Vincent fired twice. The massive, .45 caliber rounds struck Raymond perfectly in the center of his chest. The force lifted the younger Costa off his feet, hurling him backward into the reinforced glass window. He slid down the pane, leaving a thick smear of crimson, his revolver clattering uselessly to the marble floor. At the exact same moment, the 45-minute timer expired. Vincent's eyes rolled back. The gun slipped from his fingers. His knees buckled, and he collapsed forward, hitting the floor with a heavy, lifeless thud. Boss! Dominic screamed, surging forward. Chaos erupted. The ghosts secured the perimeter, training their weapons on the terrified lieutenants. Sarah was already moving. She dropped to her knees beside Vincent, ripping open his ruined suit jacket and blood-soaked shirt. The makeshift chest seal had blown. The sutures holding his subclavian artery were failing under the pressure of the adrenaline-spiked blood pressure. His heart stopped. Sarah yelled over the shouting men. The steroid crash combined with the blood loss, he's in full cardiac arrest. Dominic, get the trauma bag from the elevator. Dominic sprinted to the freight elevator, tossing a heavy canvas bag across the floor. Sarah caught it, unzipping it with frantic precision. She didn't have an operating room. She didn't have a surgical team. She had a boardroom floor and a dying mob boss. She pulled out a set of sterile trauma shears and cut away the remaining bandages. "I need hands." "Tommy, put pressure exactly here," she commanded, grabbing the massive enforcer's hand and pressing it directly over the spurting artery. "Do not let up, or he bleeds out in 10 seconds. She pulled a preloaded syringe of epinephrine from the bag and jammed it directly into Vincent's thigh. Then, she began chest compressions. The sound of cracking ribs echoed in the room as she pushed down with all her weight, manually forcing the blood through his seizing heart. "Come on, Vincent," Sarah muttered through gritted teeth, her hair falling into her face, mixing with the sweat and blood. "You don't get to die now. I didn't bring you this far to lose you on a rug." 10 feet away, Raymond Costa was gasping for air. The bullets had pierced his lungs. He was drowning in his own blood, experiencing the exact same horrific death he had planned for his brother. "Help!" Raymond wheezed, his bloody hand reaching out towards Sarah. "Doctor, please." Sarah didn't even break her rhythm. She continued the compressions, her focus entirely locked on Vincent's pale face. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted aloud. She paused, pressing 2 fingers to Vincent's carotid. "That Macis. He's gone," Polygatto whispered from the table, crossing himself. "Shut up!" Sarah roared. She grabbed the portable defibrillator pads from the bag, slapped them onto Vincent's chest, and hit the charge button. "Clear!" Vincent's body violently convulsed off the floor. Sarah checked the pulse again. Silence. "Charge it again," she ordered herself, hitting the button. "Clear." Another violent shock. For 3 agonizing seconds, the room was perfectly still. Then, under Sarah's blood-stained fingers, a faint, erratic flutter began. It strengthened into a weak, rapid thump-thump. Vincent sucked in a jagged, desperate breath, his eyes snapping open to stare blindly at the ceiling. "We have a pulse," Sarah gasped, falling back on her heels, completely drained. "Dominic, the artery is stable for now under Tommy's pressure, but we need to move him to the surgical bay in the basement immediately. He needs a proper vascular graft." Dominic nodded, tears mixing with the rain and sweat on his face. He and Tommy carefully lifted Vincent onto a makeshift stretcher torn from the boardroom curtains. As they carried Vincent toward the elevator, Sarah stood up. She looked down at Raymond Costa. His eyes were glassy, staring up at her. His breathing had stopped. The man who had taken everything from her was dead. She felt no joy, no triumph, only a profound, heavy closure. 6 months later, the neon sign of the Golden Lily Diner was finally repaired, glowing steadily in the Chicago night. But Sarah Miller wasn't there to see it. Deep in the upscale Gold Coast district, inside a highly secure, state-of-the-art private medical facility, Dr. Sarah Bennett scrubbed out of an operating room. The facility didn't officially exist on any city registry. It was funded by offshore accounts and protected by men who moved like ghosts. She walked into her plush office and found a thick manila folder resting on her mahogany desk. Inside were documents from the state medical board, a full reinstatement of her medical license, a signed confession from the corrupt Hopkins administrator detailing Raymond Costa's blackmail. Her record was completely spotless. Sitting in the leather chair opposite her desk was Vincent Costa. He looked perfectly healthy, the sharp lines of his face restored, exuding the calm, terrifying power of an undisputed king. "You're legally a ghost no longer, Dr. Bennett," Vincent said, nodding toward the file. "You can go back to Hopkins. You can go anywhere. The debt is paid." Sarah closed the folder and pushed it to the edge of the desk. She looked at the underground trauma center she had built, a sanctuary, where she answered to no administrators, no corrupt billionaires, and no broken systems. "I'm exactly where I want to be, Vincent," Sarah said, a confident, dangerous smile playing on her lips. She slipped her arms into a crisp, white lab coat. "Somebody has to keep the ghosts breathing." And that is the epic finale of the Costa Syndicate series. From pouring coffee in a dingy diner to reclaiming her throne as the most brilliant and dangerous surgeon in the Chicago underworld, Dr. Sarah Bennett proved that sometimes the only way to beat the monsters is to hold their lives in your hands. If this adrenaline-fueled, medical mafia thriller kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and drop a comment below. Did Sarah make the right choice staying with Vincent's empire? Or should she have walked away? Make sure you share this entire series with anyone who loves intense plot twists and badass protagonists. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because our next story is going to be even darker, even more thrilling, and you won't want to miss a single second. See you in the next one.